We continue living in a divided world with many people's hopes and dreams. Let's learn more about morality together as we continue through Sun Tzu's Art of War. Section 11, 9 Situations. Sun Tzu said, "The art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground. 1. Dispersive. 2. Facile. 3. Contentious. 4. Open. 5. Ground of an intersecting highway. 6. Serious. 7. Difficult. 8. Hemmed in. 9. Desperate." When a chieftain is fighting in his own territory, it is dispersive ground. When he has penetrated into hostile territory, but to no great distance, it is facile ground. I think facile referring to easy or simple. Ground the possession of which imports great advantage to either side is contentious ground. Ground on which each side has liberty of movement is open ground. Ground which forms the key to 3 contiguous states, so that he who occupies it first has most of the empire at his command, is a ground of intersecting highways. When an army has penetrated into the heart of a hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear, it is serious ground. Mountain forests, rugged trees, marshes, and fens. All country that is difficult to traverse is difficult ground. I misspoke. All country that is hard to traverse is difficult ground. Ground which is reached through narrow gorges, and from which we can only retire by tortuous paths, so that a small number of the enemy would suffice to crush a large body of our men. This is hemmed-in ground. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay is desperate ground. On dispersive ground, therefore, fight not. On facile ground, halt not. On contentious ground, attack not. On open ground, do not try to block the enemy's way. On the ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies. So just let me try to comment. There's a lot to go through this section. So, you don't want to fight in your home territory because you're going to make a mess everywhere. On facile ground nearby, it's not a good place to halt because you don't want to end up fighting in your own territory because things are not going to work out well if fires break out or what have you. On contentious ground, that's not the best opportunity to perform an attack. On open ground, like trying to form a barrier on a wide open plain, is not a good use of resources. On the ground of intersecting highways, joining hands with your allies makes sense. You would rather not be the only one responsible for defending or attacking or what have you with such ground. It's a good place to join with allies. Moving on. On serious ground, gather and plunder. In difficult ground, keep steadily on the march. On hemmed-in ground, resort to stratagem. On desperate ground, fight. This point seems tautological, so for all the same reasons we don't want to fight in our home ground, because it ruins the ground, it makes more sense to gather and plunder and take everything you can from serious ground. But the tautological part here, is like on hemmed-in ground, where you're trapped and surrounded, you have to resort to stratagem because fighting is not going to work. On desperate ground, fight, but by definition, desperate ground is the ground through which you have to fight, because stratagem will not work. So I don't know. We'll see further in this section what this means. Those who were called skillful leaders of old knew how to drive a wedge between the enemy's front and rear, to prevent cooperation between his large and small divisions, to hinder the good troops from rescuing the bad, and the officers from rallying their men. When the enemy's men were united, they managed to keep them in disorder. When it was to their advantage, they made a forward move. When otherwise, they stopped still. They are here referring again to skillful leaders of old. If asked how to cope with a great host of the enemy in orderly array and on the point of marching to the attack, I should say, begin by seizing something which your opponent holds dear. Then he will be amenable to your will. Rapidity is the essence of war. Take advantage of the enemy's unreadiness, make your way by unexpected routes, and attack unguarded spots. The following are the principles to be observed by an invading force. The further you penetrate into a country, the greater will be the solidarity of your troops, and thus the defenders will not prevail against you. Interesting point. Yeah, if you're deep in enemy territory, only your most loyal followers will follow you into that. Anyway, it says the principles are to be observed by an invading force. Let's see what the next principle is. Make forays in fertile country in order to supply your army with food. Carefully study the well-being of your men and do not overtax them. Concentrate your energy and hoard your strength. Keep your army continually on the move and devise unfathomable plans. Throw your soldiers into positions where there is no escape, and they'll prefer death to flight. If they'll face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their uttermost strength. Soldiers, when in desperate straits, lose the sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they are in hostile country, they will show a stubborn front. If there is no help for it, they will fight hard. Thus, without waiting to be marshaled, the soldiers will be constantly on the qui vive, the way of life. Without waiting to be asked, they will do your will. Without restrictions, they will be faithful. Without giving orders, they can be trusted. Prohibit the taking of omens, and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. So yeah, if you force your army into a vulnerable, exposed position, if they're backed into a corner, they will fight. And if you are a skillful general doing this, you do this knowing that you will succeed. If you're not a skillful general doing this, well, that's a problem. And it says prohibit the taking of omens. So, like, have your army not be driven by some other divine will, but your own will. If our soldiers are not overburdened with money, it is not because they have distaste for riches. If their lives are not unduly long, it is not because they are disinclined to longevity. On the day they are ordered out to battle, your soldiers may weep, those sitting up bedewing their garments, and those lying down letting the tears run down their cheeks. But let them once be brought to bay, and they will display the courage of a Chu or a Kue. The skillful tactician may be likened to the Shuaijan. Now, the Shuaijan is a snake that is found in the Chung Mountains. Strike at its head, and you will be attacked by its tail. Strike at its tail, and you'll be attacked by its head. Strike in its middle, and you'll be attacked by head and tail both. Asked if an army can be made to imitate the Shuaijan, I answer yes. For the men of Wu and the men of Yue are enemies. Yet, if they are crossing a river in the same boat, and they're caught by a storm, They will come to each other's assistance just as the left hand helps the right. Hence, it is not enough to put one's trust in the tethering of horses and the burying of chariot wheels in the ground. The principle on which to manage an army is to set up one standard of courage, which all must reach. How to make the best of both strong and weak? That is a question involving the proper use of ground. So, yeah, I see. So there's this building up, saying that, yeah, armies will be strong. People will not want to leave their homeland, but obedient soldiers will be strong in the face of battle, provided that there is proper training involving the proper use of ground here. So let's get back to talking about ground. Thus, the skillful general conducts his army as though he were leading a single man willy-nilly by the hand. It is the business of a general to be quiet and ensure secrecy, upright and just, and thus maintain order. He must be able to mystify his officers and men by false reports and appearances, and thus keep them in total ignorance. By alerting his arrangements and changing his plans, he keeps the enemy without definite knowledge. By shifting his camp and taking circuitous routes, he prevents the enemy from anticipating his purpose. At the critical moment, the leader of an army acts like one who has climbed up a height and then kicks away the ladder behind him. He carries men deep into hostile territory before he shows his hand. He burns his boats and breaks his cooking pots like a shepherd driving a flock of sheep. He drives his men this way and that, and nothing knows which way he is going. To muster his host and bring it into danger, this may be termed the business of the general. The different measures suited to the 9 varieties of ground, the expediency of aggressive or defensive tactics, and the fundamental laws of human nature. These are things that must certainly be studied. When invading hostile territory, the general principle is that penetrating deeply brings cohesion. Penetrating but a short way means dispersion. When you leave your own country behind and take your army across neighborhood territory, you find yourself on critical ground. When there are means of communication on all 4 sides, the ground is one of intersecting highways. When you penetrate deeply into a country, it is serious ground. When you penetrate but a little way, it is facile ground. The reason I'm reading so many sections at once, or so many points at once here and then trying to comment, is because this is a large section, and it's difficult to break down. So when there's a statement about the leader of an army acts like one who's climbed up a height and kicks away the ladder behind him, carrying the men deep into hostile territory and then showing his hand, burning the boats, breaking the cooking pots, etc. Yeah, this is somewhat in the line of berserker, someone who is fully committed to the fight and does not want betrayal. I don't know that the rest of the... Well, we'll see if in future sections, if there's all this fear of betrayal. Because earlier sections seem to have a much lighter tone about if you reward people well, if you treat them well. And here, it is clear you don't want to bring your army to exhaustion. But, yeah, I'm curious. Let's keep looking on and see what more Sun Tzu has to say here. So he's talking, when you penetrate deeply into a country, that is serious ground. When it's a little way, it's facile ground. Oh, now I see why it's called facile. It's because that's the easy-to-invade territory of an enemy. It's not because it's easy for you to access as the host. Anyway, when you have the enemy's strongholds on your rear and the narrow passes in front, it's hemmed-in ground. When there's no place of refuge at all, it is desperate ground. Okay, that answers my earlier point of, like, what's the differentiation? It's as to whether there are strongholds, when you have the enemy strongholds on your rear and narrow passes in front, that's hemmed in. Um, Stronghold. So that'd be, yeah, enemy fortress. Why would that be on your rear? Oh, okay. I see. So the notion is that enemy is numerous and powerful at your rear, and you are hemmed in. You would, if you could easily escape, you would favor that. But, um, yeah, so this is the difference between hemmed in, where you might be able to escape, maybe, but if there is no place of refuge, you are surrounded. It is desperate ground. Therefore, on dispersive ground, I would inspire my men with unity of purpose. On facile ground, I would see that there is close connection between all parts of my army. On contentious ground, I would hurry up my rear. On open ground, I would keep a vigilant eye on my defenses. On ground of intersecting highways, I would consolidate my alliances. So, yeah, it makes sense that on contentious ground, you want to hurry the rear so your army is not split. Um, on open ground, keep a vigilant eye on your defenses from what? It's open ground. Can you not, like, see everything? Um, I guess the point is because you can see everything, it's an opportunity to see everything. And so, even though you are exposed from all directions, you likewise can see in all directions, and it makes sense to not be overly exposed. Yeah, and you consolidate your alliances, preferably on intersecting highways with your allies. On serious ground, I would try to ensure a continuous stream of supplies. On difficult ground, I would keep on pushing along the road. On hemmed in ground, I would block any way of retreat. So, contrary to my point about, like, you'll see in some historical contexts, in hemmed in situations, sometimes armies have successfully escaped. But here Sun Tzu says he would just block the way of retreat, so you'd have to fight the stronghold. On desperate ground, I would proclaim to my soldiers the hopelessness of saving their lives. For it is the soldier's disposition to offer an obstinate resistance when surrounded, to fight hard when he cannot help himself, and to obey promptly when he has fallen into danger. We cannot enter an alliance with neighboring princes until we are acquainted with their designs. We are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we are familiar with the face of the country, its mountains and forests, its pitfalls and precipices, its marshes and swamps. We shall be unable to turn natural advantages to account unless we make use of local guides. So, point of order. This is a bit boastful, is it not? And it is thankful, or I'm thankful. I thank Sun Tzu for writing that we'll be unable to turn natural advantages to account unless we make use of local guides. Because even the local guide's not going to know everything. Things change, even in the earth. Over time, things change. Our understanding of the earth itself is also flawed. But, yeah. It's a bit boastful, but it's better to be more familiar with the ground than your opponent, to know it as well as you can. But there is some possibility that you still, despite advice from local guides, despite the best of science, you might still not be in a great situation. So to me, this seems a bit boastful. That yes, while you do seek to do everything you can and to know things, and it's quite important to know things for everybody's survival and wellness, um, there is some point at which I don't know if this is realistic to even. Yeah, I'm criticizing, but what for? Um, to be ignored Uh, I think there's a typo. To be ignorant of any of one of the following 4 or 5 principles does not befit a warlike prince. For these following 4 or 5 principles, warlike princes need to be familiar with these principles. When a warlike prince attacks a powerful state, his stewardship shows itself in preventing the concentration of the enemy forces. He overawes his opponents, and their allies are prevented into joining against him. Hence, he does not strive to ally himself with all and sundry, nor does he foster power over other states. He carries out his own secret designs, keeping his antagonists in awe. Thus he is able to capture their cities and overthrow their kingdoms. Bestow rewards without regard to rule, issue orders without regard to previous arrangements, and you will be able to handle a whole army as though you had to with but a single man. Confront your soldiers with the deed itself. Never let them know your design. When the outlook is bright, bring it before their eyes, but tell them nothing when the situation is gloomy. Place your army in deadly peril, and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits, and it will come off in safety. For it is precisely when a force has fallen into harm's way that it is capable of striking a blow for victory. Success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose. Alright, so I missed something here? Or maybe I'm misreading, or there's a mistranslation or something. So there was a point that said to be ignored of any one of the 4 or 5 following principles does not fit a warlike prince. I didn't see that in here. But yeah, we understand that when men are brought with proper purpose into proper situations, they will fight for their lives. And it is... I do find some contradiction almost in, like, when the outlook is bright, bring it before their eyes, but tell them nothing when the situation is gloomy. There's this quip that no news is good news, but I don't really know. There's all this information about don't overshare things, but here we are saying when the outlook's bright, bring it before their eyes. But the earlier sentences, confront your soldiers with the deed itself. Never let them know your design. So, like, don't let them know the overarching plan. But when there are concrete objectives to perform, let them know what these are, so that they may be successful at it. I'm not sure that I'm following. But yeah. Bringing into awe and wonder one's enemies. Yeah, I don't know. What does this have to do with ground? Let's move on, because I'm just not following this. Where was I? So, moving on, the success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose. Bear in mind, like previous points said, you are an enigma. Like, confuse your ally, confuse everybody. Don't let people know your true purpose and such. Oh, and by the way, success in warfare is gained by carefully accommodating ourselves to the enemy's purpose. Assuming that the enemy, like, reveals its purpose. So let's move on. By persistently hanging on the enemy's flank, we shall succeed in the long run in killing the commander-in-chief. This is called ability to accomplish a thing by sheer cunning. On the day you take up your command, block the frontier passes, destroy the official tallies, and stop the passage of all emissaries. Be stern in the council chamber, so that you may control the situation. If an enemy leaves the door open, you must rush in. Forestall your opponent by seizing what he holds dear, and subtly contrive to time his arrival on the ground. Walk in the path defined by rule, and accommodate yourself to the enemy until you can fight a decisive battle. At first, then, exhibit the coyness of a maiden until the enemy gives you an opening. Afterward, emulate the rapidity of a running hare, and it will be too late for the enemy to oppose you. Alright, so these are the 9 situations. Yeah, so persistently hanging on the enemy's flank rather than directly attacking them in every situation, we will be successful in the long run in killing the commander-in-chief. Fine. Yeah, and I don't know. Forestall your opponent by seizing what they hold dear, and contrive to time his arrival on the ground. So, to the extent you can, be familiar what the enemy is doing. Observe their actions with respect to the ground, although that's only lightly touched on here. It's only touched on in the sense that, like, when the enemy leaves the door open, you rush in, and likewise, well, you take up command to block the frontier passes. What that means is, like, if there's a wide open frontier, but there's a narrow pass, block those. See how the enemy has to react to such situations. I don't know what destroy the official tallies refers to here. I guess if you're in possession of enemy intelligence, in this case, yeah, it's more profitable to destroy that intelligence than to have lingering spies. I guess having spies be successful in this day and age is not really as much a thing as it might be these days. Yeah, stopping the passage of emissaries. Yeah, you want to disrupt the enemy's plans as much as you can, but not engage in combat unless the ground conditions favor combat. And if you do back an enemy into a corner, they will fight for their lives. So, in accord with previous sections, only do that when it's most profitable to do that. Don't pick a fight if there are more effective ways to win. Yeah, don't pick fights on terrible ground. There's a lot of points here. So, again, our 9 types of ground that we were talking about were dispersive. I guess dispersive being like your home ground, that from which you originate and disperse. I don't know. Why is it called that? Or possibly refers to if the enemy has struck into your home ground, you want to force them to disperse immediately. It's probably that, why this has its name. We talked about serious versus difficult ground. So serious ground would be when an army has penetrated into the heart of a hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear. That is serious ground. So, yeah, when you've... it's not even crossing the Rubicon, it's much more than that. When you have fortified cities in your rear. So you're surrounded from the rear as you're marching forward. There is no return there. That is serious. And sure, there are mountain forests, etc., that are difficult to traverse, which are difficult ground. It seems like the further we get into this document, the more tenuous the connections are. but also another way to think of that might be that the earliest sections in the Art of War perhaps are as clear as possible, and perhaps it's difficult to keep restating the same principles while continuing to introduce new material. It'd be nice if there were a version 2 of this document where everything was as coherent as possible. But yeah, the overarching point here seems to be twofold. One, so that your enemy might not know what you are doing. Leave your own army mystified so they don't leak this information to the enemy. Constantly be shifting your plans. This seems like some next level strategy gaming that perhaps well, you don't want to contradict any of the previous advice about overtaxing your soldiers and so forth. But you do want to have an aura of chaos about you that the enemy is not going to predict your every move. I guess we look to, like, I don't know, 19th century or 20th century warfare to see the effectiveness, at least as I'm familiar in the West with it, of leaving the enemy guessing and fighting this it's not a modern style of warfare because Sun Tzu refers to it back here. But yeah, when you're surrounded, yeah, you need to at that point inspire your men and rouse them to be able to fight with their full will and acknowledge that they will do their best, but their lives are at risk and there's no choice but to fight. So on desperate ground, I would proclaim to my soldiers the hopelessness of saving their lives. Yeah, that our only choice is to fight, and we chose to fight, and it's a good thing to do. It reminds me of, like, ant colonies where they will band together and fight, or there's some situations where a queen needs to flee and fly away, and the ants will glue themselves together and form a tower or something to that effect, because the colony is lost, and it's essential. There's a greater purpose being achieved. But only in that kind of situation do you declare this kind of desperation. And you shouldn't be boxed in like this in the first place if you were competent, except when the heavens have somehow decided against you that this was just not your year. And the most terrible conditions might fall upon you and your men, your army. But, so there is that possibility, and it is addressed in the Art of War. I'm a bit surprised by that. It doesn't mention how you came into being in this situation, but nonetheless, yeah, you want to confuse your opponents so they don't ally together to fight you. Yeah, so likewise, you do not strive to ally yourself with all and sundry, because then, in coordination with so many other parties, they're going to ask you what your will is all the time. If you have so many allies, you become reliant on having so many allies. And Sun Tzu does not see that as a positive thing. He prefers that you remain chaotic, and I don't know. I'm curious to hear what other theorists have to say about relying on having so many other allies, and if that's a weakness, or it can be a strength, or it's perhaps situational. I don't know. But yeah, place your army in deadly peril and it will survive. Plunge your army into desperate straits and it will come off in safety. For it's precisely when a force has fallen into harm's way that's capable of striking a blow for victory. I don't, again, know that this is necessarily true, because the heavens could have decided that this is not your year, this is not your century. This might be the end. But there is this optimism in this work that if you are competent and you do the right things, that in these situations, the heavens will favor you. Your army will coordinate no matter what their ranks. They will fight their best and they will win. If you are competent, and not mentioned here, the heavens also favor you. So it's interesting. Look forward to hearing what Sun Tzu says in other sections. Perhaps after reading the complete work, I might share further thoughts and reflections, because there's truly an immense amount of material to parse through here. I'm finding it more and more difficult to parse through this as well. So again, today I was reading through section 11 of this. Perhaps you have thoughts about this. I'm struggling with it, but I think I'm, well, I don't know, morally I'm struggling with it. I think I'm following what it is saying. It's just I do not understand it in its totality. Perhaps you might have better thoughts about what this means than I do. Either way, thanks for listening. Let's continue learning together. Have a good day.